Hi everyone, I'm Frank Daniels, and you're watching Football DataLab. We work with a database of over 30,000 active professional players across more than 80 performance metrics. Today, we're looking at how height shapes where a footballer plays and how they play it. In front of us is the height distribution of nearly 20,000 professionals. The curve is almost perfectly symmetrical, peaking at around 181 centimeters. That's the median of professional football. But look at the tails. Players below 170 centimeters and above 193 are well represented, and they're clearly not there by accident. The question isn't what height counts as normal. The question is what happens to a player because of that height. Some positions demand size. Others actively reward compactness. Some leagues have historically prioritized athleticism, while others lean on technique and pace instead. So today, we're cutting the data three ways: by position, by league, and by the point where height stops being an advantage. Okay, that sets the frame. Now let's see how height.
We've already seen how height is distributed across players in general. Now the more pressing question is where that difference shows up most sharply, broken down by league. The chart covers almost 6,000 players across 8 competitions. The German Bundesliga and the Czech League stand out immediately. Their average squat height is noticeably above the rest. Norway and England sit somewhere in the middle, with the Netherlands bringing up the rear. So why Germany and the Czech Republic specifically? One explanation is the physical culture of recruitment. Coaches in those leagues have traditionally placed a premium on athleticism through the center of the pitch and across the back line. Another factor is academy philosophy. If clubs favor taller players from a young age, that preference gradually shifts the average upward across the entire league. But height is only part of the picture. The real question is where a taller player actually ends up on the pitch. Okay, that covers the geography. Now let's look at how height distributes. We've covered where tall players cluster across leagues by position on the pitch. Now let's look at exactly who fills those roles. The sample here is almost 11,000 players, and the gap between positions is very clear. Goalkeepers and center backs comfortably sit at the top of the list, noticeably taller on average than everyone else. Strikers are no small figures either, but they sit one step down. One explanation is purely physical. Aerial duels inside the penalty area directly affect outcomes, so clubs deliberately target taller players for those roles. Another explanation goes back to academy selection. A tall teenager gets funneled into defense or goal early on and simply stays there. Fullbacks and defensive midfielders sit closer to the middle of the range. Speed and mobility matter far more than centimeters in those positions. Okay, we've covered who stands tallest by position. Now let's look at where height stops. We've already seen how height sorts players into positions. But here's the real question. Where does that physical advantage actually convert into results? Look at this histogram covering nearly 2,000 players who win aerial duels. The picture is striking. The distribution shifts sharply to the right. The bulk of these players cluster between 185 and 195 centimeters. Players below 180 are almost nowhere to see. One explanation is pure physics. Greater height means a higher jump point, which means a better chance of winning the aerial ball. That holds regardless of tactics, league, or level. The other explanation is selection. Coaches deliberately put taller players into aerial contests, which amplifies the numbers further. It's not necessarily that shorter players jump worse. They simply get handed that job far less often. The conclusion is straightforward. Height doesn't just determine position. It determines the type of work a player receives on the pitch. It's a closed loop. If this kind of analysis interests you, subscribe, and we'll be back in a few days with more breakdowns from the same dataset.